Hey, coming to you with another edition of Mayor About Town. I am Mayor Andrew Mullen, and we have a great show today featuring the legacy mayors, Wayne Fadden, Barry Pettit, Andrew Humphrey, and Ken Wilcox. There are 7 living mayors in the city of Wayzata, and we have 5 of them here today, 25 mayors since the late 1920s. First I'd like to introduce Mayor Wayne Fadden. He was elected in 1968, serving through 1974. If you'd just like to, sort of introduce yourself and give a little background.
Hi, I'm Wayne Fadden, as the mayor said, and I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy you got this group together, Mayor. I was a 3-term mayor, almost 3 terms, back when Wayzata was small and much different than it is today, and a lot less expensive back in those days. I kind of backed into being a mayor. I was city manager before, and when I left the city management, I went into private business with no thought in mind of being mayor of Wayzata. But I had a call one night, from some local businessmen, former friends, no, I'm just kidding, who wanted to have lunch with me at Wayzata Country Club, which I did, because I was curious what they wanted. Not thinking that they wanted to talk to me about being mayor. Well, that's what they wanted to talk to me about. And I left the Wayzata Country Club after a couple-hour discussion, agreeing to run for mayor. I did, and I did for 3 terms, unopposed, which was comfortable. And I had a wonderful time doing it. I had good friends on the city council. There was not a bad city councilman during the 10 years that I was there. And most of them were there for the same tenure that I was there. So it was a pleasure, and I look back with fond memories about a number of things that took place, and I guess I'll have a chance to talk about those at a later time.
You will, yeah.
Okay.
Next up is Barry Pettit. He was elected in 1996, serving through 2004. Barry, you'd like to reintroduce yourself.
Well, I am Barry Pettit. I'm looking at all these questions that we're going to be asked. Is this the camera up here? Asked to answer. And so I'll be interested when they come around, because I'm trying to figure something there. But I was on the council, Planning Commission Council, did that kind of stuff. And then Giswold, who preceded me, decided not to run. And that's how I got involved, just coming off the council and doing that.
Next, I'd like to introduce Andrew Humphrey. He was elected in 2004, serving through 2008. He is the only father-son mayor combination in the history of Wayzata. So, Andrew, welcome, and maybe say a few words.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's really fun to be here. It's really a highlight. I was really honored to serve as mayor. I served on the council before and planning commission before, and got involved in it. My parents moved here when my mom was pregnant with me from San Francisco, and they both got very involved in the community, including my dad joining the council and mayor. And so it was really instilled in me when we moved back to Wayzata, and there was the opportunity to get involved. It was kind of something that I'd grown up with. And it was a real privilege. So.
Thanks, Andrew. Next, I'd like to introduce Mr. Ken Wilcox, who was elected in 2008 for mayor, but had tenure before that, serving through 2020. And I had the privilege of serving alongside Ken for 8 of my council years. Ken, if you'd like to just say a few introductory words.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and it's great to be here. It is kind of fun, because my time on the council before I was mayor, I was sitting like this with Andrew as the mayor, and so this is like old times, just in close proximity, which is kind of fun. I had no particular ambition to be mayor, but when Andrew Humphrey had to leave because of his business requirements, I was sort of the next guy up, and I said, well, okay, and so.
I had to convince you.
Well, we talked, we talked, but that's kind of how you do it. I mean, I don't know anyone here that's particularly had an ambition to be mayor. You just sort of, it evolves, and suddenly you are one, So, anyway. Good to be here.
Thank you. Maybe I'll stick with you, Mayor Wilcox. Thinking back to your 12 years of service as mayor, what were some of the challenges that you faced during that tenure of 12 years?
Well, unlike Wayne, who had nothing but great council members working with him, we had occasional odd ones. So those were the challenges. When you have to hire a psychiatrist to help work with the council,
Just
you've
for
got
the record, that was not me.
No. No one here. No one here, in fact. The biggest challenge was, for me, which really led to all kinds of things, was the recession in 2008-9. And that triggered an awful lot of things that we did with the council after that. And those were the challenges.
Yeah. Mayor Humphrey, how about during your term? What were some of the big challenges that you faced during your tenure?
I just want to comment on that last comment because Ken and I got together the first couple of years he was mayor for coffee periodically, and the standard line was he would say, "I'm still mad at you." Because I left and then the recession hit and he had to deal with it and did it masterfully. But, I think when I came on, the city was pretty divided. There was a strong anti-development group that I think was pretty suspicious of a lot of what government was doing, and a lot of people that didn't want any growth to happen, and that was a hard thing to navigate, and hard thing I think to hopefully reestablish some trust during that process.
Yeah, thank you. Mayor Pettit, so tell me about, in your 8 years and 2 terms, what were some of the biggest challenges that you and your council faced?
I'm thinking the biggest thing that the biggest challenge we had was the Big Woods deal. And it was complicated and emotional, to be sure. And I don't think it exactly went the way that I wish it would have, but it was an interesting point in time, and everyone's it's fascinating. You reflect back on things, and you're always under the assumption, if you said the right thing at the right moment, could you have changed outcome? And I think one of the liabilities I've always had is I've never been quick on my feet. And I think it's probably the architecture deal, because you sit down and you do stuff. You get, how do you do this? You don't have to come up with quick answers. Not like a great attorney where you better be fast, because it really is so much of what you do. And so I reflect on that a lot. I think, God, I know I could have changed the outcome with a couple different ways of view. But that's for me.
Yeah, Mayor Fadden, what would you consider the greatest challenge that you faced with your council in your tenure?
Well, I thought about this a lot because there were a couple of things, but one in particular was the highway department, the Minnesota Highway Department came in and wanted to bypass Highway 12 around Wayzata. Prior to that, all the traffic from Minneapolis, commuter traffic, went down either Highway 12 through Wayzata or down Main Street.
Right.
And that was a lot of traffic back in those days. And so the highway department came in, presented a plan to bypass around Wayzata, which became somewhat controversial primarily with the business community, because there was concern on their part that if all the traffic was bypassed the town, they would not get the business they were getting from people stopping on their way home from work or going on their way to work. Well, in hindsight now, it was the best thing that ever happened to the retail community, because it got traffic off there, and it allowed for people to come into town to do the business that they wanted them to do. So we had a number of meetings on that with the Chamber of Commerce, with other groups here in the old City Hall, and the end result was it worked out very well. We had to replace 5 or 6 houses, one of which was my mother and dad's house. And it worked out fine for them because they were able to take the house they had and move it to a different location And so there were some of those kind of issues involved with it, but it turned out well.
And Mayor Fadden, you actually born and your whole life have lived in Wayzata, 91 years young.
I was born in a house that no longer exists on Berry Avenue.
Okay.
And so, yes, I've been here all my life. I was gone twice, once in the military and once on a corporate move to Denver. But other than that, I've lived here, which is a long time. Wow. And I've been very blessed.
It's amazing. Maybe coming back to Mayor Humphrey here for a moment, as you think back to your tenure, like what's your proudest accomplishment as mayor, during your time?
Well, I think I say this somewhat jokingly, but I mentioned earlier getting Ken to run really, I think, had a huge impact. I really mean that. And in part, I say that because of the time when you started your term, your 12 years, was such, not only the recession happened, but it ties into what I guess is my proudest accomplishment, which was to help shepherd in the approval of the Presbyterian Homes development, which we approved it at 2:30 in the morning in December of 2007.
I mean, after like 5 or 7 hours of debate and testimony.
On a 3-2 vote. And I think, like most things that many of us have been involved in, I'm so glad that you're living there now, Wayne. That makes me happy. But it's a big development, and it ideally would have been a little less massive. Maybe there would have been some design changes, but it has served such a purpose in and of itself. But it's also provided for so many things that have happened over the next 20 years, most of which Ken got accomplished. But I remember a Lakeshore Weekly News when I think we were on the council together. The reporter had attended a workshop and had drawn this complicated knot, this ball with just all these interrelated challenges. How to deal with the gas station that used to be on the corner of Superior, how to straighten out Superior, how to move the Muni, how to replace the old Bay Center that needed replaced, how to then get parking on Mill Street, how to get a park, which was Ken's really thing that he pushed for from a very early stage, onto the lake, and then that set the vision for Panaway. So much of what was accomplished, that was the predicate for it, and I feel, I'm glad to have been a part of that.
I might add that meeting when we approved Press Homes at 2:30 in the morning. There were too many people who wanted to speak, so we couldn't have it here. We had it at the school over here, and so we were in the gymnasium, right? And the press was all there. The local media were all there. And after the vote was taken and people were starting to leave, they wanted interviews with people. And one of the people that was there in attendance was Peggy Douglas, who was the head of was at a chamber at the time. And I remember the reporter going up to her and saying, "We'd like to get your comments on the camera. Do you realize it's 2:30 in the morning? I look like the wrath of God. I am not going to be in front of a camera." So anyways,
That's a great story.
Anyway, it was pretty funny.
Maybe Mayor Pettit, what was your proudest accomplishment during your tenure?
Actually, we put the campus together up here, and it turned out pretty well. But I think
you mean the city hall,
the
and
city
the
hall,
library,
and,
all of it,
and so on and so forth. And I think what was really pretty cool that we had the money saved. We were the last community in the state to do a TIF funding for the library, literally on the last day of the year. And so financially, it was really a tidy package where everything was put together. Didn't have to interfere with additional taxes required and so forth. So I think it turned out to be a good series of buildings. But I think the idea of saving for it and doing the right thing so that it didn't cost any more.
Well, and you also, with your design background, I think the design of these buildings is fantastic.
It worked out
And
well.
it was beautiful right away, but they've stood the test of time, too.
Well, and I will say, when we went off and raised a little bit of extra money for it and went to Betty and Whitney McMillan, which was a pretty cool story, and they came up with some resources to help us out, so that worked out.
And weren't they mostly centered on finishing the library a certain
The
way?
library was the big, hook for them, which, made a lot of sense, but it...
I think that library is probably one of the finest in the entire system. Just the layout, the compactness, the where it sits with the view over the lake. It's
Well, it certainly is better than the parking lot that's there, so I'm pretty proud of that.
no, hats off to you, Barry. That was really great.
Well, this complex also fit in well with the fire station.
Right,
which I was
exactly,
involved
exactly.
with way back when. And so it turned out to be a very nice complex, I
Yeah.
think.
Mayor Fadden, as you look back, what was your proudest accomplishment during your tenure as mayor?
Well, I'll talk about one thing in particular that kind of fell into our lap, and that's the depot down in Wayzata. The Great Northern, at that time, the Great Northern Railroad decided they were going to abandon the depot and tear it down because they didn't need it anymore. Bill O'Loughlin, who was the station master for umpteen years, retired, and they had no reason to continue on with their activities there. So when we heard about that, we called on the Great Northern and had a very nice conversation with them, and we wound up buying the building for $1.
$1.
$1.
Wow.
And
That's a good deal.
And they were very, very
Even today.
happy. They were happy for us to take it off their hands, I think. And in addition to the depot, there was a train semaphore type of semaphore out by the railroad, which we said we'd like to take that also as a memorial or a memory, if you will, of what happened here. And so that is now in the backyard of the depot. When we took over the depot, we weren't sure what we were going to do with it, other than we wanted to preserve it because it's a beautiful building. It's part of Wayzata's history going back to the early 1900s, and it's turned out to be a very
Wayne, your foresight on that, I mean, that's probably one of the most iconic structures. When there's any picture of Wayzata or anybody making reference to it, there's always the depot. And I didn't know that it went back to your time here, but boy, that was very good decision.
I was happy about that. So, as I say, it fell into our lap, but it was a nice lap to have in your lap, if you will.
Yeah, no, that's good. Turning it over to Mayor Wilcox, as you think back to your 3 terms, what was your proudest accomplishment during your tenure as mayor?
The recession in 2008, 2009 really kind of focused our attention, and so we had a lot of empty storefronts in town. People were asking, what on earth are you doing to our town? It's dying. And so what we had to do is try to breathe life back into Wayzata as best we could. And so everything from Presbyterian Homes here, that was part of that because we had done a retail study in partnership with the Chamber of Commerce that said we needed more retail in Wayzata to make Wayzata a destination point for shopping. And so Presbyterian Homes came along and said, well, we'll give you 130,000 square feet of new retail, ground floor retail, and if you approve our plan, it will include that. And it just all came together, but that was exactly what we needed, so that certainly helped the approval. But so that was a major accomplishment. Building the new Muni was another major accomplishment. We could do that fairly quickly, and we thought that was important to show people that we weren't out of business, that we were still Wayzata doing our thing, and that never would have happened without your hard work in putting all of the details together, getting the help that we needed to do the planning. That was a magnificent job on your part. But anyway, so we got that, and then the whole lakefront effort unfolded, and item by item by item, we finally got people back. We changed the ordinances to allow some sidewalk restaurant, the patio out on the sidewalk, and
I think that's been fairly successful.
that got more enthusiasm and more people, and suddenly Wayzata became the western restaurant hub, of the area. So it all came together, but it was all these piecemeal kinds of of decisions, as Andrew pointed out. One of the interesting things was we had to straighten Superior Boulevard to accomplish some of the stuff like getting rid of the gas station. We had a problem because there was the creek, that little creek that runs down,
Gleason Lake Creek.
yeah,
Creek.
ran under Superior Boulevard in a conduit of some sort. So the DNR had ownership of the creek and wherever it went, which then included the part over Superior Boulevard that had the conduit underneath it. That became DNR property, see. So we needed to get ownership of that little piece of nothing, I mean, right, in order to do what we wanted to do with Superior Boulevard. So we went to the DNR and said, why don't you give it to us for $1, right? And they said, well, that's interesting. However, they had had a big Christmas party the year before that had not been budgeted by the DNR. And so they had spent quite a lot of money on the Christmas party, and the legislature was horrified and insisted that they reimburse the state for the money that they had paid out for their
I
Christmas
know where
party.
this is going.
So, but they could not sell any buildings that they had or parkland. So that kind of limited them to what. So anyway, we show up and say, we'd like to buy this little patch of land for $1. Huh. So they dispatch some kind of real estate guy into Wayzata, and he does a survey along Lake Street of what the cost per square foot of prime retail was. And of course, it was a staggering figure. I can't remember what it was, probably $300,000, $400,000 for this little strip that we wanted. So we were working with Jen Olson, who was our state senator at the time, and she was horrified. So she went to the governor and said, these are your people. This was, I can't remember.
Plenty, right?
Yeah, it was Plenty. It was Governor Plenty. He said, this is Wayzata. These are your people. What are you doing? So anyway, we had a kind of a lengthy battle with the DNR, but the governor did intercede, and so we got it for $1, and then we could, in fact, go ahead with Straight New Superior and so on. Anyway, little sideshow.
Well, it's also interesting, Wayne, your story about what Lake Street used to be, before the bypass, where it was 4 lanes, no stop signs, and that curve of Superior was built that way to make sure there was no slowdown of the traffic. I remember it was when, as a kid, biking Wayzata, you had to take your life in your own hands.
That creek, by the way, just as a side, when I grew up, it was a creek.
Mm-hmm.
You could see it. It wasn't underground like it is now. And because I grew up on the other side of Folkestone on Circle A, it was right in our front yard. And it was a place for about 6 of our neighboring kids and myself to go down there and play, and in the spring of the year, spear fish.
Right.
We'd be in jail today if we did that, but there were a lot of fish in that.
Well, that came up during the discussions with Presbyterian Homes, because some people, the people who didn't want change, there were some people who wanted it to revert to the swamp that it had been, they call it a wetland.
Right.
But I remember Dan Fazenden got up at some point during the open hearing, and he said, look, anybody who refers to that wetland as Walden Pond has something else coming to him, because that was nothing but a fetid, mosquito-infested, old tire, swamp. That's where we went. He said that's where we went to hack carp. So, anyway.
When we were at lunch, Mayor Wilcox, you were telling the story about when it was rebuilt into Press Homes and the layers of concrete. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, the whole Presbyterian Homes property, as Wayne well knows, was built on this wetland, right? And so, yeah. Now the shopping center itself was on piling, so that stayed the same, but the parking lot every year sunk a little bit into the swamp, and so every year they would add more asphalt on top to get it back up to the right level. So when they went to build this Presbyterian Homes project over here, they cut through the asphalt. It was 8 feet deep, 8 feet of asphalt, layered up from all the years of adding asphalt. It was just amazing.
And then Wayne, you were talking about when it was first built, which was, on or around your tenure.
Oh, it was a huge problem with the building of that was caused a lot of problems for the city. But it was built, and then after it was built, as you say, kept sinking. The parking lot kept sinking to the point where the building inspector had a duck boat under the shopping center, and he would go down there once a year to inspect the building from underneath in his duck boat because it was all water down there.
I love it. The building inspector. That's ingenuity. He put a duck boat down there to do his. Oh, that's great. Maybe over to you, Barry. You went through quite a few, sort of complex decisions. One being the Big Woods, and how did you approach decision making when the stakes were high? Kind of leading your council and leading the community when the stakes were high. How did you approach it?
I looked at this question and I thought, boy, I hope I didn't get asked this one because I'm not sure I got a good. It was really a group of pretty independent thinkers. So the idea that you were going to steer anybody in a direction they didn't want to get steered into, I don't think I was good enough to do that. So it was really, pretty thoughtful. I think the way everyone went through it, and at some point you said, "What's the vote?" It was kind of that simple,
Mayor Humphrey, you had you mentioned earlier the sort of development, anti-development, and kind of navigating through those two sides. As mayor, you have to be, or you try to be Switzerland and facilitate through it. So how did you approach all those complex decisions that you had to deal with?
Well, I'm not sure if if the way I approached it was the best way. It might have been. I think it could have been more efficient. I think of that 2:30 meeting. That was in part because I thought it was important to let everyone speak, and I think that had some value, but it probably slowed the process down. And similarly, to your point, the council, there were probably times where I could have gotten everyone together and just say, okay, let's do this, and I was hesitant to do that. I think it had some benefits I think there was some good esprit de corps and people felt included in the decision making. But as I say, I don't think it was necessarily efficient.
Well, I have to remind you of a great story. When I first got elected in the fall of 2008, I took you out for breakfast at the old Pancake House at the Bay Center, and I said, kind of young and coming into this with not a lot of experience, what's your advice on how to be a good council member? And without even skipping a beat, you looked me right in the eye and you said, drink. And I said, what? I was kind of put on edge. I said, drink. And he said, yeah, well, probably not what you're thinking. He said, there's a very unique tradition in Wayzata, which is the council gathers after each meeting at the Wayzata Bar and Grill, and the public are welcome. And you need to fight like heck when you're in that room for what you think is right, but then you need to make peace with your neighbor at the meeting afterwards. And then there was a second part to your story. He said, and you're kind of an assertive guy, Andrew. I said, remember, if you try to do things alone, you'll drink alone and you'll become an alcoholic. So you need to work with 2 other members, sometimes 3 other members of your council to get anything done. So don't drink alone. It takes 3 or 4 to have a party. And I thought that was just such a great analogy. You may not remember that, but boy, that was burned in my brain. And boy, did I think about that during my entire time on council, about those words and going to the muni afterwards and fellowship and all of that.
Oh, that's nice to hear. I remember part of that, but as a lot of people know, that tradition was started by my father when he was mayor, and it was because he had a very divisive council member, and it was causing all these tensions. You have open meeting laws. Yeah. So he wanted to get everyone to be able to come down, as you say, after just divisive votes and be able to be together, and he got Bob Miller, the city attorney, to research it, and I don't know if this is still on the bottom of every agenda, but saying members of the city council, will gather at the Muni after each meeting for a purely social occasion. The public's welcome, and that was the way to continually invite people. And we would do that, and there would sometimes be members of the public who would bring up chairs. So it was great, but I think it had a big impact.
Well, that was part of the argument, at the time to keep the Muni back in 2008 was, this restaurant had been owned by the town since 1947. And I didn't know that your dad had started that tradition, but it makes perfect sense. The gentleman that he was and how he approached the world, that makes perfect sense to me. And it's still a tradition today in 2025.
Let me just add another story about Mayor Humphrey here. It was a vignette back, I can't remember what year in his tenure, but anyway, it was April 1st, and at the end of the council meeting, he said, "I have one more announcement to make," and everybody was ready to leave, and so that kind of snapped us all back. And he said, "I'm reporting that that the mayor of Minnetonka and I have been in negotiations for quite some time, and we have reached an agreement in principle to merge the two cities." At which point, you could see the staff members, with the blood just kind of drained from their faces, and the council was just horrified looking at him, and he kind of beamed out at the audience and said, "April Fool."
Oh, I love it. That's
It
fantastic.
did take a little while, and there were people who were so mad they stopped watching, but they started writing me, and
they
they'd never heard
they
the
didn't get the April
Fool's
Fool
name.
part.
How could
Oh.
you do this?
Oh, yeah, that was amazing.
So Mayor Fadden, when you were here and went through some of these complex decision-making, what was your approach to leading your council in the community when the stakes were high and emotions were high?
Well, we fortunately, I was never involved with a meeting where we had tensions high. We had 3 people that came to every council meeting and sat in the front row, the Gees, who are long gone, and Mrs. Straka. And they were there before the council got there, every council meeting, sat in the front row, and they kept us calm and collected. I'm being a little facetious. The Gees live down on Shady Lane on the lake, and their house, as a matter of fact, is on the National Registry now. And as far as I know, their daughter still lives there, unless she's
No,
passed.
she's around. I
He
saw
does.
her about a month or so ago.
Okay, I wasn't
Still
sure
there.
if she's alive
Yeah,
yet.
Mary Ellen.
Mary Ellen, yeah.
That's right.
So we didn't have any high tension type situations. We were very open about talking about things. We didn't have any secrets. The highway, as an example, we had some informal open houses to discuss it and let people know what was involved. But that was kind of our modus operandi. Also, we try to keep our meetings short so we could do informally the Muni. And we went down there every night after a council meeting, and I think the latest that we had a council meeting was maybe 11 o'clock. That would be the exception. So fortunately for me, I guess, we had no big controversies. And unlike the big woods or whatever, and so I had it easy.
Mayor Wilcox, I mean, you certainly had your fair share of interesting challenges and different perspectives. How did you approach? I mean, I was by your side during many of them, and I certainly had great admiration for your calmness and your equal treatment of everybody. But how did you come up with that? How did you pull that off?
Well, I think your biggest job is listening. And the more you listen, I think, and the less you talk, the better off you are. And the other part of the job is being a cheerleader for your city, I think. And so, as Andrew said, if people think that they have been heard, whether or not you side with them in their point of view is really not as important to the fact that they were listened to, you paid attention to their point, and you took it into consideration when you made your decision. So, and in the end, it's a much more harmonious kind of result, I think. So, I mean, I tried to do that.
Well, so this has been a great conversation this afternoon. I'm going to turn to sort of the last question, but it's probably the most important one. So, if you need a couple attempts at this one, we'll give it to you. But I'll start with you, Mayor Fadden. What would you like to be remembered for during your time as mayor? What would you want the community or the history books to reflect on your tenure?
I guess I did a good job, number one. as the mayor says, we were very open about things and listened a lot. And I wanted to be sure that we did listen and picked up on whatever the people wanted. I didn't go into the job looking to be a popular type person or that kind of thing. I just went into the job wanting to do the right job and do the right thing, and I think I did that.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Pettit, what would you like your legacy to be during your long tenure as mayor here?
I'm not sure, I be honest, but I was thinking about this under one of these other questions about, the community. And what I recall, and Wayne, it's got to be the same with you, boy, just a number of people that, were the old folks that were there at the meetings. And remember John Berryhill?
Oh, yeah.
Very well.
Every time he'd introduce himself, it would start out, I was an Eagle Scout in 19,
Yeah.
whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
And then,
He wore his uniform once.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
and it was the characters, that, and Peggy Douglas, good friend of ours. And so you see all these people disappear. And it's really the most remarkable thing for me, because it was a town where you walked down the street and, you knew almost everybody.
And they knew you.
Yeah, exactly. And it was, and the Muni thing was, an important deal. I mean, we had fun. The deal was, how soon can we get this over so we can, and we were the last ones out of there. And so for me, it's stuff like that. No one's going to remember me for thinking about people that have been gone, but it's sort of when I think about the history, for me, it was that. And again, just all the people drifting away. You get that person of the year thing, and you go down the list, and there's only about 8 of us that are even, still kicking anymore, but it was such a critical core part of the town way back when, that really made it special. And I think back to your point, the reason it was it was so cohesive, I think the town was in general.
Very much so.
And so those are the kind of things. I will say one thing, though, and I just got to say it's kind of a funny story. Every time we started the meeting, I got into watching Seinfeld reruns. And they ended at 7 o'clock every night. And on Tuesday night, ended at 7. I wouldn't get down until 5 after 7, and that's when the meeting would start.
You had to get that rerun in.
And I will say one thing. Every house we've lived in has been torn down. Oh, wow. And the last one up in Highlands, right. It actually got picked up and moved. Oh, wow. And there was a deal on one of the local...
Is there a historic plaque? The mayor lived here?
Well, there was a deal on one of the local news channels says ex-mayor's house gets moved out of Wayzata.
No kidding.
And got set out in a farm field somewhere, and I don't think it ever got reused, but it was some idea. But anyway, that's not a great answer to the question,
No,
but
I
it's all I got.
I really like your answer. Mayor Humphrey, as you think about your tenure here, what would you want to be remembered for?
I don't really have anything I'd like to be remembered for other than, that people can, I think, like with all of us, believe that I worked hard at the job, I did my best, and I love the city. And building on what Barry said, this is a unique city, and even some of the stories we've told about some of the divisiveness at times, that's because there's so much passion. And, you look at the high electoral turnout rate every year. This is an engaged community that cares deeply about this place, and it was a real privilege to serve.
That's amazing. Mayor Wilcox says, we close it out here. How do you define legacy as you think about the mayor?
Well, I think it's like all of us who we try to do our best, and each of our tenures had different challenges, and we dealt with them as best we could, and hopefully they were on balance successful results. Like Barry, as Barry was saying, to me, the benefit of being mayor was just the breadth of people that you met that you otherwise wouldn't have met and interacted with. And it was an incredibly enriching experience just to know the people, get to know the people in town more. Because as Barry said, there are some real characters here.
Still are.
Yeah, they still are, and they're great fun. So, legacy, we met the enemy, and he was ours, and we did the best we could, and it is what it is. You know.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank each of you for taking the time this afternoon to share your 57 years of leadership history here in Wayzata. It was sad that we weren't able to have Mayor Giswald and Mayor Mouton with us today, but they're here in spirit. And, I'm just grateful just hearing the wisdom at this table. And boy, the footsteps here are hard for someone like me to follow. And I'm just grateful for, I know I can count on each of you when I run into a trouble, and probably already have for a few times, but I'm just grateful for your service. And I know the community is, and all the people that you served with, and hope that tradition holds up. I mean, I agree with you, Andrew. We're so lucky that we have an engaged electorate that cares, and they show up and they want to make a difference, and they want us to make the best decision we can. So I'm grateful for that.
Let me just add that we've all been talking about what we did and how we approached it, but you were a major part of a lot of this, over the last 12 plus years. So just the fact that Andrew didn't say much here is not a reflection. I mean, he has been in the trenches doing wonderful things for this city for a long, long time. And so I thank you, and I know you're going to do great on the years ahead as well, just because you did such a fabulous job to this point. So
Well, I appreciate one of the beauties of being the host of the show is I can ask the questions and not have to give the answers. And I actually, of the many things I do as mayor, this is one of my favorite things because I don't have to come up with the answers on my little TV show. So, gentlemen, thanks for being here today and for sharing your great stories, and what a great history lesson for our community. And remember, leadership doesn't stop at the mayor's chair. We have lots of ways for our citizens to be involved here at the city, boards and commissions, and that usually comes up in the fall into next year, and hope that many of you watching may consider volunteering. And with that, I'm just going to say, remember to support local, and it strengthens Wayzata, and I hope to see you about town. Thanks again.